Let's talk about how to estimate an irrational number. A rational number, as you'll recall, is a number that can be written as a fraction. And when it can be written as a fraction, what that means is that as a decimal, it will either terminate or it will repeat. It will have a pattern to it. But what do we do if it doesn't do either one of those things? That's what's called an irrational number. So it is a decimal that does not terminate. The decimal continues to go on forever. And also it does not have a pattern to it. There's no discernible repeating set of numbers. And the square root of 2 is an example of this. So how could we estimate what the square root of 2 is? Obviously, we can figure out exactly what the square root of 2 is using a calculator, but how could we get just kind of a ballpark estimate of the square root of 2 without using a calculator? So the first thing that we would want to do if we were going to estimate this is that we would pick two perfect squares on either side of the number 2. Now remember, a perfect square is the result of squaring a number. So for example, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9. So perfect squares would be 1, 4, 9. And our number 2 is exactly in the middle. Well, not exactly in the middle, but is in the middle between 1 and 4. So let's put our 1 and our 4 here, and we're going to put our 2 that we're trying to find right in the middle in between these. What we're saying is that 2 is greater than 1, but it's less than 4. Okay, 2 is in between 1 and 4. It's bigger than 1, but it's less than 4. What this means is that the square root of 2 is going to be in between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4. Square root of 2 is between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4. If 2 is between 1 and 4, then square root of 2 is between square root of 1 and square root of 4. And what this means is that since the square root of 1 is 1 and the square root of 4 is 2, we know that the square root of 2 is in between 1 and 2. So a reasonable estimate for the square root of 2 might be that the square root of 2 is about, and that's what this wavy equal sign means, it means about, it is about 1.5, because that's in between 1 and 2. So a reasonable estimate might be that it's between 1 and 2, 1.5. But can we do better? Can we do a better estimate than just 1.5? And the answer is yes. Let's pick some numbers between 1 and 2 and square them and see if we can get something that's a little bit closer. Okay, what I mean by that is we think it's about 1.5. Let's try what's 1.3 squared? Let's find 1.4 squared, and let's find 1.5 squared. So it looks like these are going to be really difficult, but if you have your squares memorized up to 15 squared, it's not difficult at all. 1.3 squared can be found by doing 13 squared, which is 169, and then putting the decimal point after the 1. 1.4 squared can be found by doing 14 squared, which is 196, and putting the decimal point right there. And then 1.5 squared can be found by doing 15 squared, which is 225, and then putting the decimal right after that point. And now we can do an even more accurate estimate because we know that our square root of 2 is in between these two numbers. 2 is between 1.96 and 2.25. 2 is in between 1.96 and 2.25, which means that the square root of 2 is in between the square root of 1.96 and the square root of 2.25. Just like we did earlier, we said 2 was between 1 and 4, so the square root of 2 was between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4. Same thing here. We know that 2 is in between 1.96 and 2.25. So the square root of 2 must be in between the square root of 1.96 and the square root of 2.25, which means the square root of 2 is in between 1.4 and 1.5. Square root of 1.96 was 1.4, and the square root of 2.25 was 1.5. So if the square root of 2 is in between 1.4 and 1.5, we could get an even better estimate by saying the square root of 2 is about 1.45. Hopefully you can draw a conclusion here about how we might even go further and get an even better estimate for what the square root of 2 is, an estimate that goes out to 3 places after the decimal. But I think for right now, 2 places or to the nearest hundredth is accurate enough for right now. We can say the square root of 2 is about 1.45, and if we needed to estimate out to the 3rd decimal point, we definitely have a starting place for how we could figure out how that's done.